the U.S.'s visa bans on European citizens.
The United States has barred 5 European figures from entering the country.
Accused them of coercing American social media platforms into censoring viewpoints they disagree with.
The most powerful border of the modern world was never marked on a map. It wasn't guarded by soldiers or walls. It appeared silently on screens, written into law, enforced by governments through platforms, algorithms, and visas. And in late 2025, the United States made that border unmistakably clear. 5 Europeans were denied entry into America. No criminal charges. No security allegations. Just one accusation: censorship. Europe called it intimidation. Washington called it self-defense. But the reality was far bigger than a visa dispute. A regulatory disagreement had crossed into open confrontation, and the battleground was the internet itself. What once sounded abstract, buried inside legal texts and policy debates, suddenly became real, personal, and geopolitical. For decades, the US-EU alliance was built on shared values, shared threats, and shared economic interests. But by the time 2026 arrived, those values were no longer interpreted the same way. Europe argued that regulating digital platforms was essential to protect democracy. The United States argued that those same rules were being used to silence American viewpoints beyond Europe's borders. This moment changed the conversation. It revealed that speech, data, and digital power are no longer technical issues. They are tools of state influence. Borders no longer stop at oceans or checkpoints. They now exist inside servers and code. And when America drew its digital line, the message was clear. The internet is no longer neutral ground. If you care about free speech and who controls the internet, subscribe now. This story affects everyone online, and it's only just beginning. In the final days of 2025, the US government announced a decision that stunned European capitals. 5 European citizens were banned from entering the United States. The announcement was public, direct, and intentionally political. The justification was alleged involvement in censorship that affected American platforms and American viewpoints. These were not ordinary officials. Among those banned was Thierry Breton, the former EU Commissioner for the Internal Market and the chief architect of the Digital Services Act, the European Union's most ambitious attempt to regulate online platforms. The others were high-profile anti-disinformation figures deeply involved in shaping Europe's digital enforcement policies. Washington's accusation was specific. These individuals were not simply regulating Europe's digital space. The US claimed they enabled extraterritorial censorship by pressuring American tech companies to change content policies globally, including for users inside the United States. In effect, Europe was accused of exporting its speech rules beyond its borders. To enforce the ban, the administration invoked the Immigration and Nationality Act, a law that allows entry to be denied if a person's presence could have serious adverse consequences for the country. Historically, this power has been reserved for national security threats. Applying it to digital regulators marked a dramatic shift. The signal was unmistakable. The United States no longer viewed Europe's digital rules as a technical or commercial issue. It saw them as a strategic challenge. By using visa bans rather than negotiations, Washington ensured the confrontation could not be quietly resolved. What once might have been handled through trade talks or regulatory forums became a public assertion of sovereignty. The internet, long treated as a shared space, had become contested ground. From Washington's perspective, the bans were not retaliation. They were resistance. US officials framed the move as a stand against what they described as a growing censorship industrial complex, a system in which governments, regulators, and platforms allegedly work together to control speech under the language of safety and misinformation. The US Secretary of State publicly accused European ideologues of leading coordinated efforts to pressure American platforms into suppressing viewpoints they oppose. The concern was not Europe regulating its own market. It was Europe influencing how American platforms operate worldwide. In this framing, laws like the Digital Services Act are not neutral safeguards. They are instruments of power. Transparency mandates, algorithm scrutiny, and enforcement threats are seen as tools that reshape global speech standards, even outside Europe. Washington argues that allowing this sets a dangerous precedent. If Europe can impose its standards globally, other regions could follow, each demanding compliance with their own rules. The result, the US fears, would be a fragmented internet governed by the most restrictive regulations. The visa bans were meant to send a warning. Digital regulation is no longer insulated from geopolitical consequences. Individuals who design and enforce these systems can now face direct state responses. For the United States, this was about drawing a line. American speech, American platforms, and American influence in the digital space were no longer open to external pressure. Whether this protects free expression or accelerates conflict is the question that now defines the transatlantic divide. Europe's reaction was immediate and angry. Leaders across the continent described the bans as coercive and politically motivated. French President Emmanuel Macron called it an attack on European digital sovereignty, capturing the deeper fear behind Europe's response. Germany labeled the decision unacceptable. Spain accused Washington of practicing censorship while claiming to oppose it. The United Kingdom raised concerns, particularly because two of the banned individuals were British citizens. While the rhetoric varied, the message was unified. Europe would not accept intimidation. For Brussels, this was about the right to regulate companies operating within its market. For years, American tech giants dominated Europe's digital space, shaping public discourse while facing limited oversight. The Digital Services Act was designed to rebalance that power and impose accountability. From Europe's perspective, US anger revealed discomfort with Europe becoming a rulemaker rather than just a consumer market. Because of the EU's size, its regulations inevitably carry global consequences. What Washington calls extraterritorial censorship, Europe calls the reality of regulating global platforms. Tensions were already high. Weeks earlier, Europe had issued its first major penalty under the new law, fining X $140 million for lack of transparency. While European officials insisted it was not about content, Elon Musk publicly denounced it as censorship, reinforcing the American narrative. Europe now faced a dilemma. Retaliation risked escalation. Silence risked surrender. At stake was not just regulation, but Europe's ability to enforce its laws without external pressure. By 2026, it had become clear this was not a one-off dispute. It was part of a broader struggle over who controls the digital world. Trade tensions, regulatory clashes, and unresolved negotiations had already weakened trust. The visa bans pushed the conflict into a new phase. One path leads to escalation. More fines from Europe. More restrictions from the United States. Increasing fragmentation of the internet into competing regulatory zones, each enforcing its own rules, each mistrusting the other. The other path leads to negotiation. A fragile balance between free speech and regulated speech, where both sides accept limits and acknowledge shared responsibility. But rebuilding trust after personal bans and public accusations will not be easy. What is certain is this: the internet is no longer neutral territory. It is a strategic domain, just like trade routes or military alliances. And control over digital space now shapes global power. The Atlantic Ocean once defined the distance between allies. Today, the deeper divide runs through platforms, policies, and code. In the digital age, borders still exist. They've just moved online. And in the end, one question rises: is the US protecting free speech, or is Europe pushing regulation too far? Subscribe and share your view.